There we go. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the One Fun Guy podcast. Today, I have the group of Calamity Comics with me, Elliot and Alicia. Guys, introduce yourself. Tell us a little about yourself, and we'll get into this.
Hi, everyone. My name's Elliot. I'm one of the co-owners of Calamity Comics. I write children's books. I write comic books. And we're here to talk to you today about what we do.
And hi, I'm Alicia. I'm the other co-owner of Calamity Comics. I'm an illustrator, and I'm just happy to be here.
Awesome. So let's start the show out with how you two met. How did you guys get to be in this together?
I'll start, and Alicia can probably finish it. So we met under really interesting circumstances about 2 years ago, or last year at C2E2. We were at a C2E2, and there was what's called a speed dating for writers and illustrators. And it was a panel where writers, illustrators would come together, and you'd have about 7 minutes together to discuss your stories, your art style, and all that stuff. And Alicia and I happened to meet at that panel on a whim. I mean, personally, for me, I found out about it like 2 hours before it started. I didn't have anything with me. I didn't have a finished story. I didn't have notes. I didn't even have business cards. I just had like a sheet of loose leaf paper that somebody gave me, a pen that they gave me, and I had maybe some unfinished scripts on my Google Drive that I had on my cell phone. I'm like, here's what my stories are about. Here's a page or two that you can see that's very unfinished. And Alicia and I met, and we were able to bond over, we didn't actually talk about comics or art right away. We were talking about traumatic experiences that we had both been through and bonded over that, and then got each other's contact information and kept up. And we followed up about like a week later, no, that same day, but then kind of finalized things about a week later or so. And the rest was kind of history from there. I'm sure Alicia can elaborate a little more than I did on that.
Yeah, I remember being totally unprepared too, and I don't even think we got that far. Like, I didn't see anything you wrote. We were just talking the whole time, and it was like the rapport was the most important part of that whole interaction. Like, we had talked to other people just trying to get into the comic book world. Like, it was just a panel for people who wanted to get into comics, who probably never had before, and so everyone there was pretty inexperienced. But we were lucky enough to like find some success there. And I was unprepared too, but I knew about it the night before. I was just like, I don't know what I'm going to do when I get there. And luckily, like Elliot gave me the chance, he did, and he came up with like letting me audition as an artist. And that was really cool. I wasn't expecting to do that. But so he sent me chapter 1 of his script for his comic, and it was really compelling and everything. And then I drew what's called the audition piece, and I'm so glad that happened because I had no like art to show or anything, no comic art to show. I had stuff that I drew in high school, and that was about it because it had been years since I drew something very seriously. Mm-hmm. So having the chance to like show somebody what I got, it worked out.
And what was interesting about what Alicia was saying was her art style. She was showing a lot of like pencils, a lot of like watercolors, but nothing that was like a comic book style, like that digital look that had like from, you know, where they did the inks and pencils and then would convert it over to Photoshop and then color digitally. With all the panels, I didn't see that type of work, but I was auditioning maybe 4 or 5 other people at the time, and I said, look, if I'll pay you for your time, draw any page that you want from the script for this issue and let me see what you got. And then about 6 weeks later, she was really trying to make sure it was as good as she wanted it to be, because in my mind I knew she could do it. I just wanted to see it done. And when I got it back, I was like, there's no doubt you're the one for the job. Let's get this done. And because people who know about different art styles, there's obviously different style between like pencils, watercolor, and all these other things. But when you get that digital comic style with paneling in there, it's a completely different game. So to see her come through with that and see her talents really shine, it was really something special.
Awesome. So let's take it one step further back now. What got you into writing and what got you into art? Because obviously there's a backstory to all of this. You just don't wake up one day and say, I'm going to write a comic. Maybe you do. I don't know. Tell us how this came about.
Well, the comic book came about because I have been very open about this. I was in therapy for years and still am to an extent. But when I was going through a lot of dark times emotionally, and I had a lot of anger issues, self hate issues, and a lot of negative self talk, I wasn't really understanding why I was feeling this way, and I didn't understand what was causing it, how to go about dealing with it. So in my mind, I would kind of detach myself from what my situation was. And I would say, okay, what would I tell myself if I had to talk to myself about what was going on? And as a result, I kind of created these stories and about like, okay, if I'm going through this, I would just write down what the situation was and I try to analyze it from a third person perspective. And as a result, I came up with this character who embodied these situations I was going through to help myself navigate my feelings and emotions. And it wasn't even that I had the idea to write a comic book. It was just I was writing a story to help myself. And then over time, like I just started writing scenarios of like, okay, he's with his friends doing this, or okay, this thing's happening, or okay, this scenario happened. And try to understand the inner workings of my anxiety and mind and emotions and what was going on with that. And it turned into just essentially a writing exercise for myself to a 9-issue comic script. So,
Okay.
and it felt I was just compelled to write. If I could write this to help myself, then at least somebody out there can read it to help themselves as well. And if I'm going through it, I know other people are going through it, and that they can be helped to try to understand that they're not alone in this fight against anxiety or whatever it is that they're going through. So it went from just this, I'm trying to help myself and understand what I'm going through, to let's write a story about it to make sure we can help others with it too. As far as the children's book goes, it was just, I want to write a cute story. And I was like, oh,
Right.
this will be a cute story to go.
Yeah, we'll talk about the children's book later because that's a very interesting thing.
Complete opposite of what the comic book
Yeah.
topic is. So it's almost two completely different podcasts in a sense, but that's essentially where the writing for the comic book started. And then I've always been a big fan of comics, which we can get into at a later time, but it was just seeing the different types of indie styles that were out there, and that these are stories that you can tell. It's not just Marvel and DC, Batman, Superman that you can tell. You can tell these very connected, down to earth, real stories through comics. And I think comics are just a very strong medium in order to tell these kinds of stories.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I got into writing.
So how about you into art, Alicia? How did that start?
I'm a self-taught artist, and it's kind of like my native language is pictures, and so there's really no start to it. I've just been drawing since the beginning. But the very first comic that really touched me was Mouse by Art Spiegelman. And it was like, that's when I realized that, like you were saying, Elliot, like Marvel and DC, great. But then you had this other category of indie, or my favorite is like history and nonfiction kind of thing. Instead of reading like a huge history book that is like really boring, you'll miss parts of it, condensing it into something artistic and something purposeful like a comic, it's so different than any other artistic medium, I think, because like take cinema, for example. Cinema, you're watching a movie, and whether or not you pay attention to it, it will just march on, and like it'll reach the end without you. You don't even have to pay attention to it or connect to it. But a comic book, you make the decision to turn the page, to keep reading the next panel, and you're like in a living dialogue with the author, with the artist, and things like that. It's just so active and so purposeful. So I think it's a great learning tool, and that's what I was looking for when I went to C2E2. So I was meeting writers who were really into like action heroes and anime, manga, and things like that, and fantasy and things I didn't connect with. I was like, I want to find somebody who's going to write a true story or something nonfiction. And Elliot was the only person who wrote about himself, like using fiction. So I thought that was really cool.
Okay. I mean, I also kind of remember from that, I think a lot of people were writing fan fiction for like TMNT and
My Little Pony.
My Little Pony fan fiction, and just drawing stuff like that. Like, that's lovely, but unfortunately not what I'm looking for, but you do you.
Right. Yeah. It's crazy because I never got into comics as a kid, right? And not till I got to college when I met some buddies of mine that were artists that were all about comics. And my buddy James, who I've had on the podcast, he was the one that kind of brought me into that world because I had no idea. Like obviously, like you said, you've had Superman and Batman, like you understand what the backstory is for that. But like his comic book collection is like into the thousands, and I didn't have a single one till I met him. So it was kind of weird. I was always drawn to the Punisher. That's just because by default, but going into comic books when you guys were young, besides that, like were you into comic books? Was that like a thing or for you guys, or was that
for me on and off? Because like when I was a kid, my uncle would take me to San Diego Comic-Con and he'd be like, Elliot, read this, read this, read this. And it was like Batboy or just obscure things. And I was like, okay, cool. This is cool. Because it's not just Marvel, DC superhero stuff. I mean, that stuff is cool, but it's like, I can't fly. I'm not a billionaire who is a masked crusader who's avenging his parents' death. But then like I would read certain stories that were like, oh, this is about some kid on a skateboard who's just trying to go through the things that he's dealing with in life. Like that's relatable. And I'd always find I could relate more to those indie stories. But then for many years, like I wasn't really as into comic books because I was so focused on law school that it's like, I don't have time to read, let alone read comic books.
right?
And then after I started to have a life again after law school, it was like, okay, let's get back into this. So then I'd go to C2E2 and other cons and stuff. And then it's like, oh, I can do this now. I have time to read books. And, but it always came back to these indie stories because when like I'd walk around the conventions and stuff, if there's even at the indie level, there's always people writing about their version of superheroes, which is fine. But I just I'm kind of sick of superhero stories personally. Like I think we all have experienced the Marvel fatigue from every single Marvel superhero blockbuster coming out. Like we're all excited for the Superman movie.
Yes.
But
right.
I can only watch so much of Marvel movies at this point from every spinoff. And same thing at the indie level. Like everyone has their version of a superhero, which is cool and all, but I don't really care because it's just ultimately the same story over and over in a different way.
Right.
But when you get these indie creators writing about their unique experiences, and even if it's just a unique twist on a superhero that's not so focused on the power, but more of the backstory of it, that's where these stories tend to shine and where I tend to connect to them and where I feel that comics are really able to do their job in justice. Because you can have these, like Lisa was saying earlier with movies, to an extent, you can compare movies to comics in a way, but with movies, they have millions of dollars of budget to deal with. In comics, you can have those millions of dollars of special effects, but it only costs a certain amount just to draw them. So you can have these insane budgets, so to speak, in terms of like what it looks like, but in reality, it's just however much it costs the artist to draw the page. So you can have these massive stories in these smaller universes, and you're not limited by, the budget of a movie studio. It's just limited by your imagination.
To piggyback on top of that, I just wanted to add that, like, okay, the kinds of movies that comic books are most like are definitely animated. Because if there's one thing I know about animated film, it's that nothing is an accident. Every single thing that appears on that screen was somebody's decision. It's purposeful, and there's just so much intelligence behind comics and animation. And that's why DC's the best, because their animated films are the best.
And Elisa, how did you get into comics when you were younger? What was your relationship with the comics?
So I found comics with complicated protagonists to be relatable. And I was a big reader, so I was reading like Stephen King when I was like in middle school and stuff, and I transitioned into comics like in high school because I really liked how gritty comics could really get, especially in the indie circuit kind of thing. And the one I read ad nauseum was something by Jonan Vasquez, and if you don't know that name, you probably know Invader Zim. He made that show later on, but I always used to say that I want to grow up and be just like him, and I still say that. And I would always just kind of make comics in my spare time that never really saw any of the light of day. So I know I have comics like under my bed at my parents' house somewhere, probably.
It's funny because when I had the comic on the last time when I was talking to him, my first introduction really to comics that I can remember was Tales from the Crypt, because at the beginning of the episode they would always have the comic, and then it would go into real life. So they'd flip through the pages of the comic, and you would see it. And that was like my first introduction to like comics. So I never had a physical comic book until I was in college, like I said. So that was like my first intro to like seeing it when they would flip the pages, and then the Crypt Keeper would go on and he'd turn real, and then it'd go into the episode, and then it would end with the comic as well. So.
And I think that's so cool about it. I think there's at least in my experience, there's a negative connotation towards comics in that, oh, these aren't books. And they are such a powerful form of literature to me, because I do see them as literature. It's just for more of a visual learner. And I am one of those people who if you give me a book, I cannot read it. Like, unless it's for work, I just will not read it. Too many words, not enough pictures, brain goes away. But it's the visual element that makes comics so compelling, along with this dialogue that goes with it. So to me, it is a form of literature. Just a lot of people don't see it that way, unfortunately.
It's also one of like the longest, most endearing forms of literature, I'd say, because what it is like sequential art, sometimes with words kind of thing. And you've had those as far back as like however old newspapers and periodicals are. You've always had those in the papers. I mean, they weren't, like, to a lesser extent, there was like some of them explaining what was going on in Ireland or England at the time, and people could barely read, but they could like see the picture and be like, oh, that's happening.
If you really think about it, cave drawings way back when were also sequential art.
Oh yeah, there you go. Moose becomes bear, becomes
reincarnated into eagle. It's the circle of life.
Yeah.
So when you started writing, Elliot, did you have like a critique of yourself, or did you just write like journal form and then say, I'm going to turn it into a story? Or did you like, how did that idea come about?
So when I was writing, I did it in probably the way that you're not supposed to. I just went straight to scripting and paneling. So I would like write page 1, exterior shot this, panel 1 this, dialogue this, and it was very like a movie script, which is not the best way to start out writing, because you can't really see the bigger picture. I was just kind of writing as I went. I didn't really have an outline for the story. As far as how it would go in like the editing process, I would reread. I'm like, oh, that sounds right, or okay, that I hit the beats here that I wanted to hit. And then I got really serious about it when I hired my editor, Blair Schiff. And the original script for my comic was 4 issues. She read it and she's like, okay, this sucks, but we can make this better. And then we worked for like another couple months, if not a year, to really fine tune what we had and then add more to it to make a more well-rounded story. So it went from like 4 chapters or 4 issues to 9 issues. And now it's a much more well-rounded script. And my critique of myself probably would have been, if I had known what I knew now about writing and sequential storytelling, I don't regret what I wrote. I'm not changing anything that I wrote. I think what it is great, but there would probably have been a few things I would have included differently towards certain points of the story, just in terms of the visual, not in terms of like the narrative itself. Okay. So it would be like, including splash pages, which is just a single page of a, like when you just have one panel on the page, that's called a splash page. So I would include more splash pages at different points in an issue, as opposed to where I did in certain points. But in my mind, I wrote everything as well as I could at the time that I wrote it. I can't change it, and I don't want to change it. Okay. So you're always going to look back at your art, at your work, or whatever it is, and think, I could have done this better. I could have done this better. Like, yeah, hindsight, you probably could have. But there's no need to beat myself up over it, because at the time that I wrote it, that was the best thing that I could have done. You learn from it, you move on, you do better next time.
Okay. So let's talk about creating the comic itself. Do you do panel by panel, or do you write the whole story and then color it in, or how do you guys work together? Is it?
So I'll tell my part and then hand off to when Alicia does her part.
Okay.
So the way it works is I start with an idea, as one does, and then I'll outline the story, and then I'll write. So it's a very like loose, okay, this happens, just like some major story beats I want to hit, or even just to the point of I want to start here and I want to end here. depending on the story, I'll either do, like more descriptive. Okay, this happens this chapter, this happens this chapter, or I'll just have a start to the chapter and just kind of riff the story until it reaches the natural point of where I want it to be. When I kind of have that, or I'll just do a straight up script where I do the panel 1, page 1, whatever, dialogue this. Once I get that done, then it goes to editing, and my editor goes through it, and then we go back and forth on it. And once she gives me the approval, then I consider that done, and then I hand it off to Alicia, and that's where Alicia's job starts.
Yes. So right away, when I get the script, I read the full script or however much I have, and I can, with Elliot's writing, not so much everybody else's whose scripts I have read. What stands out is I can see every single panel, the way it's written. And so I hold on to those ideas of like, I'm reading page 1 and this is what page 1 looks like to me. So not to waste time, not to forget my idea. I jot it down with just like one pen in a small piece of paper, and that's called a thumbnail. And then you compile like a whole book of thumbnails, ideally. Our first issue is 20 pages, so 20 thumbnails, one for each page of just what I think the page would look like. So they're my ideas. Yeah.
And Lisa, not to interrupt you, but can you explain like the detail that goes through a thumbnail verse, so that way it's not like a completely finished piece, right? It's what would it look like?
It's the most basic thing ever. In fact, basics are so hard for me because I'm such like a detail-oriented person. I was at San Diego Comic-Con, and there was a panel for comic art, and I think his name was Peter Young. He was a really great artist, and he was leading the panel, and he was like, everything is boxes. No, he's like, you don't write, you don't fill in anything. It's just like, if you want to draw a car, just draw a box and like 2 little circles, that's your car. So you just want to do this very basically to get your point across. That way you can pass it on to your writer, because the next step after I've drawn just basically stick figures for 20 pages, we talk about it. We talk about camera angles, whether or not we're doing like there's all kinds of ways to design a comic book page. Sometimes there's lots of very defined panels, or sometimes you're just kind of free drawing it. You just got to be creative. And we talk through that entire thing. It's just us planning how the pages will look before the drawing even begins. And then what I tend to do is I start off with an actual sketchbook and pencil and pen. And I've never used to use pencil. That's kind of new for me. So I'm like sketching now. It's really helpful. It keeps things moving. And then you ink it with the pen, and then I scan it so that I can use Photoshop to color. I was really hoping when I found my first project to work in black and white, because I've only ever worked in black and white, but Elliot insisted on color. So I am kind of learning how to color right now. And it's not as hard as I thought it was. But thankfully, digital coloring is so much easier than the real thing.
Now, do you get the freedom to pick what you want to do, or does Elliot say, I want this page to look like this, and you kind of duplicate it, or does he kind of give you the artistic freedom?
He always tells me to go with my gut, and I do ask the major things, like, oh, I have this idea, and sometimes we'll just agree on something, but it's pretty laissez-faire.
Normally her first instinct's always right, and okay. Like she'll come with a sketch like, hey, what do you think of this? It's like, yeah, that's it, go with that. And perfect. My job on that end is kind of to just be the reassurer of, yeah, you're doing great, you work through it, it's going to be fine. And then it always is.
Right.
One of the best quotes I heard at San Diego Comic-Con the first time I went was a panel of women with their own comic book company. I don't remember them, but they said, quote, it's okay to work out of order as long as you keep moving forward. So if I can't think of what to do for page 2, I'm not going to stop at page 2. Like, I'm going to jump ahead to page 5 because I know exactly what that looks like. So that keeps that keeps the work time shorter and keeps the project moving forward. So
there's another podcast called the Making Comics Podcast, and it's with writer. It's with a writer and an artist. Writer Keith Foster, artist Scott Lost, and Scott Lost. It kind of coined the phrase the Slack method, where it's just you basically work where the heat is. If you're not feeling this page, you go to this page. If you're not feeling pencils, you do inks. If you're not feeling inks, do backgrounds or whatever it is. So that way you're always doing some type of progress, which is great when it comes to art, not as great when it comes to writing a sequential story in order where you have to have certain points hit first to get to the ending.
So let me ask this. When you write, if something pops into your head, do you make a note of it? Or do you kind of like keep tabs? Do you use your phone in your note section? Like, or do you just kind of put it in the background and forget about it and then rehash it later?
It depends on how impactful it is. So most of the time I'll have like a little note section on my phone that just comic notes, and I'll just write like lines down and see if anything stemmed from it. I just wrote a one shot the other week where I had just the ending line in my head, and then I just riffed the whole story from that. So it depends. And then whereas like for our comic, I would have certain scenes where, okay, I want this and this to happen. I'd think about it, mull it over, and then I'd write, okay, this will happen. But most of the time when I get like a really good idea, I'll just write the whole thing out while it's there. Because unfortunately, I'll have writer's block where I don't write for like months at a time. And I'm like, Alicia, I'm done. I'm never going to write anything ever again. What's happening here? And then I'll just get an idea and then write something. And it's great. And then we're like, okay, we're good for another year. So,
and then you were worried for nothing.
Exactly. So it's a combination of just writing things down as they come and then panic waiting for that to happen.
Okay. So how long do you think it takes to develop a comic from the very start of an idea to the very last piece of art that you would put into it? What is that process like? Is that a short time, a long time? Does it come together quick? I'm sure there's a lot of hiccups, but...
Well, I guess to clarify your question, do you mean when you say comic, do you mean like a full on like issue that is done,
like
or do you mean
one
like a
issue
short
of
comic?
one? So not like the whole series. Like you started with issue number 1, then you went to number 2. How long did it take from the very first time that you put pen to paper to your final product? How long does that take about?
Oh, okay.
Or
so
because
we've done short like six panel stories that can be done in like a week. But the comic specifically, the script itself took probably 2 years to write, like 1 or 2 years. And then we started working together about almost a year ago. And it'll be about a year for the first issue to be done. Granted, the first
4 months were like designing. So a lot of trial and error, stop and go kind of thing.
Because the character design is everything. And it took a while to get the characters right. Once we got those, it flowed a lot better. It's just getting the design concepts out of the way took a long time. So subsequent issues won't take as long. It's just the first issue, like she said, the first 4 months was just character design. But to any creator out there, that's how important it is to have your characters locked in and your designs locked in, because it makes everything else easier. It's just you got to know what they look like first. So long story short, this first issue will have probably been 2 or 3 years in the making.
Okay. So I want to get your perspective on Kickstarter. I ask a lot of musicians and a lot of writers about this. How do you feel about that? Is that something that you promote to have somebody else help you with getting your purpose across? Or do you kind of feel that it's like asking too much? Is there a balance? Like what's your perspective on it?
I have very specific opinions on that. Alicia, I'll let you go first, though, if you have any.
I'll let you catch your breath because you'll be doing all the talking here, because I'm new to Kickstarter as well. I think it's fabulous so far. And I also liked how Kickstarter has such a presence at the conventions where people like us come for the education and meeting up with people and the business side of things. They really do. I forgot if it was San Diego or if it was C2E2, but they just have a panel where they get your questions and give you their answers kind of thing. And I was like, I like that. It seems cool to me. What do you think, Elliot?
I think Kickstarter is a great tool. It depends on how you're going about using it, though. I think a lot of people, at our level, we put very low funding goals because we essentially treat it as like a pre-order, first look type of situation, because we're not going to cons all the time because we can't get into every convention in order to have our books out. But we can put it on Kickstarter as opposed to having it like on Amazon or another bigger third-party service. And it kind of lets your audience, one, see your product, two, it gets you out to people who aren't necessarily going to be at conventions, because we could get somebody back us from California when we're in Illinois or somewhere in another part of the world, and they wouldn't see it otherwise unless it was on Kickstarter. So in that sense, it's a great tool as like a pre-order to kind of get your book out there or your product. But my issue with Kickstarter is when people are you'll get like indie creators like us who we're never going to put up how much the book actually cost to go to our funding goal, because that's just not realistic and we're setting ourselves up for failure. So we'll always put like a much lower goal just to hit that goal, to say we were funded on Kickstarter, get people the first look at the book or whatever. And then we'll eventually end up, hopefully recouping costs down the line. But my problem comes when people have like, they don't necessarily put as much into it financially, and they're trying to make so much profit off of it, which is great if you're a bigger company. Like I know people who I know what they put into it and what they're making off it, and they're at that level where they can do that. But when you're at our level, just starting out, there are people who are like, oh, I'm going to make a $10,000 goal, when it's just not realistic, and they set themselves up for failure. So there's definitely a fine line between what you're able to do in terms of what makes sense realistically for finances and to get the product out there. But also, I think at the end of the day, it just is a great tool to allow creators to get their book to a broader audience that they wouldn't see otherwise, and then build an audience from there. Because I know a lot of my friends who just have their audience on Kickstarter, and then because they don't do conventions, they just do Kickstarter, and they're able to get their books out to people without having their own website fees or anything like that. So in that sense, it's great to serve as like that platform to get the book out there.
Because I have a very love-hate relationship with Kickstarter. Like, I love the fact that I get to support my friends and that I can, put some money towards whatever they're doing to help support them. But I'm hating the fact, especially with the music, where like you have some pretty big bands now are starting to use Kickstarter.
Yeah.
And you have a lot of movie executives that are going to Kickstarter to say, hey, we can't make this movie unless you help us. And I'm very like put off by that, especially like the bands that are much bigger and have the backing where they could easily do it themselves, but they don't want to go in their own pockets to produce the album. So they ask their fans to help them. And I think it's kind of just a little egregious that you're going to help them, and then they also want you to buy the album. So you're helping them make it and you're helping them buy it. It's like, I understand times are tough for a lot of people, but like the big one that really threw me through a loop was when Super Troopers, the guys that did that, the Broken Lizard guys, said the only way we're going to be able to make a movie is if you guys finance it for us. And it's like, well, yeah, I like what you do as directors, and your art is great, but I don't want to help you make a movie that I have no part of, and then I have to pay to watch it when it comes out. Like, it's just really offsetting as a consumer to say, you guys have made a ton of money with Super Troopers. Like, it was a blockbuster movie. And just because you misappropriated it doesn't mean the fans have to suffer to help you make the next one. And they pitched it as like, oh, you're going to be a part of it. And you're going to have your name on the screen. And everybody but it like went bust. They never did anything. And then they ended up making the movie anyway. So it was like, just because the campaign went so bad, but then they made it they didn't have to piggyback off of my hard-earned money, because they could have went to Hollywood and pitched it. They just didn't want to do it.
Right.
So
I think
I have a very hard approach to Kickstarter.
No, I agree. And I think that's starting to happen more and more on the comic side as well. Like, you're starting to get like the bigger publishers starting to put their stuff on Kickstarter as well, which I understand the concept behind that. Like, people aren't necessarily going into brick and mortar comic stores anymore. And I hope they are, but a lot of people aren't, because the reality is it's all on Kickstarter or these other services. And then that takes away from, why would somebody want to pay, $10, $15 for an indie comic when they can pay $5 on Kickstarter for a major publisher's comic? And it's not to say that they wouldn't pay that anyway at a store, but Kickstarter is more catered towards the indie publisher, not the bigger publishing houses that do have these financial backings, that do have these people who are able to provide and get these comics out there. So at that level, yeah, it's kind of unfair when you have these bigger musicians and publishers publishers putting their stuff on Kickstarter, taking away from the indie people. I think the other issue with Kickstarter isn't even the issue with Kickstarter. It's that most people outside of the groups of people that use it, like musicians, comic book people, all that stuff, they don't know how to use Kickstarter. Like when I did my last Kickstarter, a lot of my friends and family were like, this is cool. What the hell is Kickstarter? How does this work? This seems really sketchy. So there's also that barrier of even if someone wants to back your product, they just don't know what Kickstarter is or how to use it. So if it was a little more readily known, then I think it would have a lot more success, more than it does already. Not to say Kickstarter isn't successful, but it just creates an extra barrier preventing the consumer or somebody from backing you on Kickstarter. So if it was like you're a direct website, that's easy. If it's like Amazon, that's easy. But Kickstarter, you have to make an account. You have to put in your credit card information. Then you have to learn how to back a tier. And I have friends who didn't even know how to back a tier on Kickstarter because they're like, oh, I didn't know. I thought you just put in a dollar amount to support the project. Like, no, there's tiers where you can choose what you want to get out of it. And it's in that sense, unless you're using it readily, it just makes it harder for the general population to use Kickstarter.
Yeah. So I know Kickstarter is controversial, and I'm going to talk about another subject that's controversial now. How do you guys feel about AI, writing and drawing? Is that I know it's a touchy subject. I've asked a lot of the artists that I've had on my show before, and I get very unique responses to that. How do you guys feel about it?
Lisa, you want to go first?
Sure. I've never been asked this before. I'm still forming my opinion. I'm leaning towards AI is just the way that what the memes teach me of people doing their homework with it. I'm like, that's cheap. I don't want my brain surgeon's gonna be like, I don't know, like I don't know what to do, because I don't know.
Let me Google this real quick.
Yeah, let me Google this. I mean, that already happens in doctors' offices. I don't like. It's like, so don't use AI for homework. When it comes to art, I'm understanding like where the plagiarism is taking place. Plagiarism's always been a problem in all of its forms in art for as long as art has been a thing. People found out ways to steal it from each other. So AI is just, it can be used to do that, but also AI is a tool, just like many of the tools that I personally use for art. In fact, I've been using Photoshop since I was like 12 years old. And the latest version really pushes and advertises AI tools. And I'm reluctant to use them because I do know that it is taboo in like artistic circles, and there's even companies out there that are like, if we ever find out that you used AI in your body of work somewhere, we're just not going to work with you, kind of thing, because it's like a trust issue thing. I get that, but I wonder. This is where I'll end because it's going to get really philosophical. But it's like, where does my using Photoshop that I've always used before AI? Where does that end and AI begin? Because some of the tools are changing to include AI features and stuff, and I just mostly stay away from it. But I do know that there's like the spot correction thing. That's pretty great.
Yeah. That's your hard stance on it. Mostly against it, but spot correction, that's where it's at.
I'll die on the hill.
So I have kind of two perspectives on this. I have the legal perspective and the artistic perspective. Legally, I mean, I know that with new copyright stuff coming out, they've had to integrate AI into copyright stuff. If you try to copyright something, you have to declare whether or not it was made by AI, and it's just not subject to copyright. So on the legal end, you can make stuff with AI, but you have no legal right to it because it has to be created by a human being, and AI is technically created by programming, which is created by a human being, but that's a whole other issue. But the programming itself is creating the intellectual property, not a human. So that part can't be protected by copyright. So in that sense, legally, it's not seen as something that has legal protection. But so that's the fun legal side of it. my personal side of it is I don't agree with use of AI in art because it takes away from the artistic integrity of the artist or the writer. If, let's say, Alicia spends, 6 to 7 months drawing this comic book for 20 pages. And then somebody's just like, okay, cool, I'm going to plug it into AI and have a 36-page issue 1 done in, a week. It takes away the integrity in it. I mean, can you do it? Sure. But I personally won't support AI art. I don't think it's something that people should be supporting because it's taking away from the creative end of people. Like if you're taking away someone's ability to create something from scratch, to use their artistic talent, whether it's writing or drawing, what are we doing? Why are we here? Because, I know at certain cons, people will say have to declare that it's AI art or that it was created with AI, and then nobody goes to them because nobody wants to, at least in my experience, support AI art. You could, as Alicia said, it can be a tool in certain instances, but I would never want to read a comic book that somebody created with AI because to me, I know what it takes to create a comic. We've worked so hard and put so much into it. For someone to take what I deem as a shortcut is just kind of shortchanging the industry. And I don't agree with that personally. So
it can be harmful. Sorry. Do you want to finish?
No, you're good. My rant's over.
Okay. It just made me think of your children's book because it can be really harmful to the readers. Reading a book that is purely AI. I've heard about like the children's book market being flooded with just AI books for kids. And they get things wrong, like because AI isn't a thinking, feeling human being. So you've got wrong numbers of fingers, you've got dinosaurs that don't exist, and like
dinosaurs that don't exist isn't the worst thing. That's kind of fun, but
like I don't know, backwoodsosaurus. Like what's that? I don't know, but like it's harmful to like the consumer, depending on who they are. And that's something new I learned recently.
It's crazy because obviously I'm a music fan and I've always been a fan of bands. And the last couple of bands that I've seen, they've integrated AI into their sets. They use backtracking vocals now. The last band I saw, 2 of the bands didn't have a bass player. They used the computer to play bass. It was an AI programmed instrument. So it sounded fantastic, but they didn't have to pay somebody to be a bass player. So I've noticed a lot of musicians are embracing it more and more. And, the backing tracks have always been a thing. But now with their laptop, they could basically take the instrumentation and just add it to the programming of the music and create that sound without somebody physically being there. So on that perspective of it, I asked a couple of the artists that I've had, and they're kind of in the mix too, because AI helps them create something visually and then they can draw it off of that. But a lot of bands now are using it, like Elliot said, as kind of like a cheat tool because you don't have to have somebody physically there to do it. You could put it in the machine and it plays it for you over the speakers. So it's a really weird thing when you go, because going to a concert, you always want to see the musicians there and play it. But 3 of the 4 bands of the last show I went to didn't have bass players, and I just thought it was odd that they just put it in the back in the tracks of the laptop, and they just hit the play button and it played all the songs without a bass player. It sounded great, but it was just weird. So I don't know. I'm kind of between 2.
That is the wrong instrument to replace at a live show, like a metal show, like getting rid of bass.
Yeah. So I went to see Filth, and there were a couple other bands that opened before him, and 3 of the 4 bands didn't have a bass player. They were programming it through the laptop, and they were integrating that sound into it without a physical person being there. And like I said, you can't tell the difference because it sounded good, but it was just weird not seeing a 4-piece, with having a 3-piece with a computer. It was just weird.
Could you feel it? Like in your acoustics?
It was just like, it was just kind of weird. And then after interviewing some band members, where money is tight now, right? If you happen to be a touring band and you could, make the same amount of profit splitting it between 3 people or 4 people versus 5 or 6, a lot of them will just cut that out and say, well, we'll just take it. We'll just kind of keep it and, go from there. So as a session musician, you don't have to hire a person to be in your band if you had AI. And a lot of them are doing that now. And, and again, the whole controversy with Motley Crue, their whole last album was written with AI. They didn't write a single verse themselves. They just put it in the machine, came out with all the lyrics, and they just sang it. And then now they're doing all the backtracks and the backing vocals and all the backing music as well. So it's like, if you have one of the biggest bands on the planet doing it, what does it take for a 17-year-old kid to make an entire album by himself? He could do it now.
And there actually is there's like this country guy who just does AI country music, and like you listen to it and it sounds so real.
Right.
And I actually would like show people like, hey, what do you think of this? Like, wow, who's this artist? Like, actually just AI. And they're like, wow. Because at a certain point, I mean, I don't agree with the use of AI art. I still think that it can be used in a very funny way. And I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
But I mean, in terms of music, like you said, like what's stopping some 17-year-old kid from being like the number one musician in the world without actually knowing how to play music?
Yeah.
Like
it's amazing, because they're one of the last bands I went to see. The guy is Cyclone 9 is the name of the band, but he programs all his music and he plays the instruments when he's in the studio. But when he's live, all he has is a drummer. Everything else is synthesized through the laptop. So it sounds great, but it's like you see a drummer and a singer and you hear all the music, but you don't see it visually. It's just kind of lackluster. So it's just interesting. But
I feel like that would take I mean, to me personally, like if you're at an AI concert, great, you're just watching someone. It's basically like the equivalency of a DJ set where you're just watching someone press play on their laptop and you're just like sitting there like cheering.
It was weird. It was visually like, it was like I said, it sounded great, but it was just like you ask yourself like why. And I understand from the financial reason, right? Because if you're going to try to maximize your profit when you're a small band, eliminating a person is more money for each of the people in the band. So I get that perspective of it, but it's just different because I grew up on concerts where every band member played, and if they didn't make $1, they didn't make $1. They got their music out, and now it seems to be it's all about the money.
And it is, unfortunately, because when you like you just said, like you said before, like people coming on podcasts and stuff will want to see a certain following because they want to know that they're going to get an ROI on it in some way, whether it's for their time or their money or whatever it is. And unfortunately, it's people don't care enough about, just getting it out there. There has to be some type of financial incentive,
right?
Which is understandable in today's economy, but it's like, it goes back to the old, what about the music, man? Like it's not the same. And whether it's art, whether it's music, like everyone ultimately, you want to know that your time is worth it. But at the end of the day, we just want to put stories, like we've even said, we're willing to, lower the price of our comic to the point that we just want someone to have an entry level into these stories to make them accessible.
Just like you were saying on a previous episode I saw of your podcast, that even without the following, like it's that the huge followings work for other people, great for them, but in our case at the it is more important to find the people who matter to each other in a smaller community. It's a lot more interconnected kind of thing. And that's kind of where we come from when it comes to comics, where it's like, it doesn't matter whether or not we're as big as Marvel, DC, something like that.
Right.
We really care about who we reach. And even if it's a smaller audience, even if it's an audience where they only have $8 to pay for a comic, it's like, well, we made our prices lower. We made our stories more meaningful because it's like, it's not about wide distribution or being palatable to everybody. It's more meaningful than that. Some things are more important than money.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a great segue because I kind of want to move into the Comic-Cons now. Do you guys plan which ones you want to go to? Are you starting to go to more physical ones? Do you still kind of just hit the big 2 or 3, or what's your plan for the cons? Because I've never been to one. I kind of want to go to one, so it's going to be on my bucket list this year to hit one, whether it's San Diego or here in Chicago. Or
well, next year we're taking you to C2E2 with us for sure.
Perfect.
But as far as cons throughout the year, we kind of divide and conquer when we're able to. Like I went to ECCC in Seattle this year. Alicia's gone to some other cons without me, vice versa. So it's like if one of us is able to go to kind of you network and promote, we will. But for the most part, we try to go to cons together the best we can. We were at C2E2 this year. We're going to San Diego this year. I'm planning to go to New York at the end of the year. If Alicia's able to go, she'll go. It kind of depends on scheduling and what we're able to do, and if we're able to get into some of these cons, because some of the cons you're just not able to get badges for easily. Like New York and San Diego are very difficult. Other cons, it's pretty easy to get badges for.
Okay.
But in
What's it
terms
like to get a booth there? Is it marketable to do that? Is it worth your money to buy a booth? Do you get it back, or is it more for eyes on, or how does that work if you wanted to actually be a participant in it versus just walking around as a fan?
we haven't actually gotten boosts yet. That's
Okay.
part of the hard part.
We've applied.
We've applied. We haven't
know
gotten in
what
yet.
that
It's very hard when you don't have a following and when you
Sure.
don't have a lot of stuff out. Like we can say, oh, we're up and coming. We've got this. Like, great. What do you have? Who follows you? And a lot of it's who you know, unfortunately. Sometimes you luck out at these bigger cons, but at the smaller cons, you can usually get in. Normally, they want to see your portfolio, social media, previous, like your resume for conventions you've been to, and then cons are typically divided into two sections: Artist Alley and the Exhibitor Hall. At bigger cons like San Diego and some other cons, they'll have what's called small press. So Artist Alley is usually independent artists, writers, creators. Exhibitor Hall is usually the bigger creators and people like that. Like that's where you get like Funko Pops and like merchandise and all that stuff. Sometimes you'll get bigger indie artists in the exhibitor section. And then Artist Alley is usually the independent people, and small press is again like small press independents as well, just a different section. So we usually try to we mostly hang out in Artist Alley, just meeting different people and just networking and talking with our friends and trying to see what else is out there, and obviously walking away with more comics than we walked into a con with.
Okay.
It's always a worthwhile thing to go to these conventions, whether you're just a fan just starting out or you're like upper level beginners like us. Because I mean, for one thing, like we were able to we stopped being just two comic book people, and then we became a team at a convention. Ideally, it would be great. We'll take any booth that we can get once we apply for it, like Artist Alley, small press, exhibitor. Wow, we'll get there. We'll get there one day. Ideally, I would like to host a panel. Those are like that's like a dream come true right there. One day.
Okay.
I want to host a panel about how to host a panel, because we've been to too many panels where people talk about themselves for like 10, 15, 20 minutes. And my golden rule is if you have a maximum of 5 minutes of my attention before I leave, because if you're talking about yourself for more than 5 minutes, you're just trying to promote yourself, and I'm not here to learn anymore. So
I've seen
that
it.
would be fun to do. It'd be fun to do.
Yeah.
I literally have my clock like, all right, we're out of here.
Yeah.
But to answer your question about like whether it's worth it or not, it depends. Like anything else. So
Sure.
they aren't cheap. The bigger the convention, the more it costs to have a table. Like I think for C2E2, I think it's like maybe $400 for a table or something like that. I don't remember off the top of my head. Some other cons it could be $200. Some cons it's $100. San Diego is probably much higher than that. I just can't remember exactly. I want to say New York for an Artist Alley table is probably in like the mid fives or so. But then when you're getting to the exhibitor hall, that's where it's like in the thousands, if not more, depending on who you are. And whether it's worth it or not depends on how much product you can move. So if you're able to sell enough to make the table back at the con, then it's worth it. If you're not, then it's not worth it. So you have to, it's kind of a pros and cons list, because some people, obviously, if it's a hometown show, you have less expenses. If you have to travel, take airfare, gas, hotel fee, all that into account, now you have to make all that back on top of the table, then sell more to even turn a profit. So it depends on whether it's worth it or not in terms of that. In terms of getting your book out there, it's great. You'll be able to meet people, you'll be able to get that out there. But, you know, at this level, if you're not able to keep yourself afloat, then it's not necessarily feasible financially to do it unless you can turn that profit.
Mm-hmm. Oh, for sure. I could see that. So in your opinion, what do you guys think makes a great comic? Is it the writing? Is it the art? Is it the combination of both? Like, what draws you to a certain comic? Is it the story? Is it the art? Is it all of the above?
I can take this one first. I think that there's three things to me that make a good comic. One is obviously art first, is the very first thing you see. If you can't judge a book by its cover. You 100% can, and often do. If that cover doesn't get you, you're not going to be good. If the interiors to me don't match the cover, I'm also not reading it. That's a whole other rant for a different day that I can rant about for an hour. But the art is number one, because that's the first thing that draws you. The story is number two, because that's what I always say, the art gets you there, the story keeps you there. And to me, number three is if I'm meeting the person who wrote it, are they a good person? Are they cool? Do we vibe with them? Because if it's just a comic off the shelf, great, cool. I love the stories. But when I'm at a con, if I don't like the person, I'm not going to want to read their comic. Like, even if it's the best thing I've ever read, I'm not going to want to read it, because now I have a bad taste in my mouth of this person. But if I'm just at a comic shop, art then story, the art and story are what make a good story every time. And on top of that, if the creator is a good person and they're cool and they're genuine about what they're doing, that is what makes it go from a 9 to a 10.
Excellent. I would say I agree with your first 2 points. It's art and then story, but because I'm the illustrator, the thing I look for is its value as a learning tool. Like, I know how I want to draw, and when I see that in another comic, I pick that up because I can study that and make my art better. And it's also just enjoyable. So it's like, I like a fun story, like a cute story or a scary story, but if the art doesn't hold my attention, and it's like, I'll put it back and find a better one. So I like great art that I want to learn from. Story, it would help if it was something unique. Like, I love superheroes and all, but I think I've read them all. So it's like something unique, something indie. And that's what I think makes a good comic for me.
And I think also, what makes a good comic for us, we'll spend hours talking about certain comics that we have read together to dissect them, analyze, okay, what makes this well, what makes this good, okay, what's the pacing here, how did this panel work, okay, the art, they did this with this, why is this so impactful, why did they do this as opposed to this, how did this make us feel? So we'll also just dissect different comics that we find very helpful and impactful, and try to use those inspirations in our work as well.
Okay. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is the environment of the community. Is it pretty positive where artists and writers try to help each other out, or is it protective of their story and they don't want to share it? How's the community like?
It depends, like anything else. I've chosen to surround myself with writers and artists in the indie circuit who I feel are the people I want to spend time with. They're helpful, nice, supportive, and that's how we tend to be with other people. You do get those other groups of people who are very cliquey, who are very protective of their work, or, oh, I'm working on this, don't want to see this, or just they're more shut off and just kind of want to sell their book as opposed to making connections with people. And then you get other people who will talk to you for like an hour or two on end just about stories and the process and things like that. So it really depends on who you're surrounding yourself with. It's like anything else. For the most part, people are good and supportive of each other because we're all in the same boat trying to just make it together. And you see all the same people at all the different cons. But you do get those groups of people who just don't sit right with you, who, are very just rude, dismissive, and ultimately they just don't get along with others. And that's fine, but that's who we choose to not associate ourselves with.
Sure. So how has the reception been towards your comic? Do people generally give you good feedback on it? Are they happy with it? Are they well read through it? How's your feedback been with it?
Lisa, you want to start?
I mean, off the top, it's a work in progress, right? We know. Okay, it's a work in progress.
Yeah, no, we're going to be done hopefully by the end of the summer and have it released, but
it's very close to being done. So we have feedback on as many pages as there are, and let's see. To tell a little story, I was just talking to somebody recently who had never read a comic before in her life, and when I told her what ours was about, she really paused and she was like, "Oh, really?" And then I showed her the first 5 pages, our ashcan, posted on Instagram, and that was the first time she ever read a comic seriously. And she was like, I can't wait for this to come out. Like, I will buy this. I want this to be my first comic. And I was like, yes, because let me tell you, the feedback I had feedback when I read the script for the first time. I was like, I can't imagine anybody else illustrating it, because I knew I wanted to illustrate this comic. I just like the story resonates. I can see every single panel. And I think that translates well into what we have so far, in the finished product. Like, there's really care behind it. There's collaboration behind it. And it's a quality piece of work.
Aw. So far, the reception's been very good to people we've discussed about it too.
Sure.
I know at C2E2 this last year, we did a cover reveal to different artists and writers, and I can send that video to you later, but the reception was very positive towards the cover and very impactful, and people resonated with what the story in the cover was. So just based off of that, there was a lot of positive reception. We tell people about what the story's about and give the pitch, and everyone suddenly wants to read it and can relate to it. And I think that because it deals with mental health and struggles with that, especially in today's day and age, more people are able to talk about this stuff more and want to see other people talking about it as well. And I actually was able to do a writer's reading when I was in Florida a few months ago, and was able to read the script for the first issue to people. And I had people talking to me for about an hour afterwards about the impact that what I read had on them, and then telling me about their stories that they've gone through with mental health struggles. And in that sense, that's exactly what we're looking for, that at the end of the day, people can talk about what's going on and share about it, their experiences, and know that they're not alone in the fight against mental health.
Okay.
So reception's been pretty good so far.
Awesome. And then I want to come back full circle. How did you guys end up with the name Calamity Comics? How did that come about? Is that
so? We were in one of our local comic shops, and it was a rainy day, and we're sitting like, we're not leaving until we have a name for our company. And I think we had like 2 different names, and we're just like, what about Calamity Comics? And we went up to the shop owner, like, hey, we have 2 names. What do you think? And he goes, that one. So we went with Calamity Comics, but not just because of the name Calamity. I think I was actually listening to we're big fans of the band The Funeral Portrait, and they have a song called Flowers in the Attic. And there's a line in the song that goes, Amity, follow me to the flowers in the attic. And I always like the word Amity, because it just, to me, it's very powerful. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, our stories are about friendship at the end of the day. And so if you took the name Calamity and break it up, it's like a call to amity. So call and amity. So that's why our logo, we have like a teardrop on the CAL part, and then amity is a half heart. So normally it's like when you're crying out in pain, you can always you always get to amity in the end. So Calamity Comics.
Awesome. That's a great story. So what I'm going to have you do now, guys, is tell us where we could find you, where we could find the comic. I know the Kickstarter is over and it's going to be out, but where could they find you guys on social media? I'm going to link all your stuff in the bio, but real quick, where could they find you guys at?
Appreciate it. The Kickstarter for the comic is probably not coming out until end of summer, I think. As I don't remember, did we tell you the story for the comic yet? I don't recall.
No, but I went on the website. I was
excellent.
Around, so
excellent.
I saw some of the pics on Instagram and some stuff.
Excellent. Yeah. No. So for me, you can find me on Instagram at Mondry Writes. I'm at MONDRYWRITES on Instagram, on X, on Blue Sky, all the socials. You can also find us at Calamity Comics on Calamity Comics Official on Instagram, and we'll have a website up in a couple of months, actually, where you can find all of our books as well after the Kickstarter.
Yeah, we're going to pile it all on for everybody to enjoy as soon as the comic comes out, because the hype is real and we want to give as much as we can. And you can reach me through Calamity Comics Official on Instagram, and also my handle on Instagram is Alicia, POPILLIA.
Awesome. Now, do you guys have any cons that you're going to in the near future, or are you guys planning for the kind of way out?
Well, we're going to San Diego in a month, so
Okay, well, perfect then. That'll be good.
so if anybody's going to San Diego, feel free to stop by, say hi to us. We might have some stickers for you.
Awesome. Well, I wish you guys the best. What I'd like to do, if I can, is have you guys on when the comic comes out and then really kind of deep dive into the mental health side of things. Because I think it kind of, we scratched the surface with it, but like there's a lot to be said about that community as well. And obviously you guys are advocates for it, which is awesome, as I am too. So I would love to have like the comic out and then see it and then have you guys back on and talk about that side of things versus more of the actual art and illustration, but talk about like the mental health stuff and how to, navigate through that.
Yeah, we'd love to. That'd be great. We'll be sure to get you a copy when it comes out
Awesome.
as well.
I appreciate it.
That's great. Oh my gosh.
Thank you guys for being great guests. I appreciate the time and I wish you guys all the best, and we'll, see each other again soon, and we'll have you guys back on and we'll go from there. So everybody, I am the One Fun Guy podcast. Thanks for Calamity Comics for coming on today, guys. And we'll see you on the next one. Have a good one, guys.
Thank you.